In the high-stakes world of global trade, threats and tariffs often make for fiery headlines. The prospect of an all-out economic war between the United States and Canada, two of the world's most intertwined economies, sparked fears of a genuine catastrophe. Pundits warned of a crisis that could cripple the U.S. auto industry, erase America's energy advantage, and trigger a painful inflationary spiral. The stage seemed set for a devastating conflict. But what actually happened? The story that unfolded wasn't one of total economic collapse. It was something far more complex, a tale of high-stakes brinkmanship where long-standing agreements and deep-seated economic realities acted as a powerful brake on disaster. This is the story of the trade skirmish that threatened to tear North America apart, and the surprising resilience that held it together. The tension was real. When the U.S. administration levied tariffs, citing national security, it wasn't aimed at a distant adversary, but at its neighbor and largest trading partner, Canada. The move sent immediate shockwaves through the financial world, with economists at major banks warning of the biggest trade shock in a century. They drew chilling parallels to the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariffs that helped deepen the Great Depression. The stated goal was simple: protect American industry. The fear was a catastrophic chain reaction, but the reality was shaped by a crucial, often overlooked factor: the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. While tariffs on certain goods like steel and aluminum did cause pain, the USMCA created exemptions that protected the core of the relationship. Canada, under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, fired back with a measured $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs. A serious response, but a far cry from the all-out war some had predicted. So how did the continent pull back from the brink, and what really happened to the industries caught in the crossfire? To understand why the doomsday scenarios didn't play out, you have to look at the sheer scale of the relationship. For decades, the US and Canadian economies have operated less like separate countries and more like a single continental engine. In 2024, an incredible $3.6 billion in goods and services flowed across the border every single day. Nowhere is this integration more obvious than in the auto industry. It's a marvel of just-in-time manufacturing, where parts and components can crisscross the border multiple times before a single vehicle is finished. A blanket tariff, as initially feared, would have been a sledgehammer to this intricate system. But that's where the USMCA stepped in, acting as a critical firebreak. While some tariffs were enacted, the agreement includes rules of origin that exempt most USMCA-compliant goods from these kinds of levies. This was especially true for the auto sector. As long as vehicles and parts met the content requirements, they could largely continue to flow across the border without the crippling taxes that many feared. The conflict wasn't avoided entirely, of course. The U.S. did impose tariffs under Section 232, starting with a 25% tax on steel and 10% on aluminum, which had a real impact. Ottawa's response was targeted and strategic. Instead of a massive economy-wide retaliation, the Trudeau government announced a $30 billion list of tariffs on American goods, a clear signal that Canada would punch back, but within a calculated framework. The markets, while rattled, didn't enter the freefall some predicted. The key miscalculation in the most dire forecasts was underestimating the power of the existing trade framework. The stage was set not for mutual destruction, but for a tense and costly standoff moderated by decades of economic integration. The North American auto industry is a single continental organism, a transmission from Michigan, a chassis from Ontario, final assembly in Ohio. This seamless flow is the secret to its efficiency. The fear was that a compounding 25% tariff at every border crossing would make this system impossible. Analysts warned it could add between $4,000 and $10,000 to the cost of a car. So why didn't car prices skyrocket and factories shut down en masse? Because that scenario never happened. Thanks to the USMCA, the vast majority of vehicles and parts that met the rules of origin were exempt from such tariffs. The compounding 25% tax that would have brought the industry to its knees simply didn't apply to compliant goods. This doesn't mean the industry felt no pain. The tariffs on steel and aluminum did raise costs for automakers, creating headaches for supply chain managers. but the catastrophic, narrative-defining events that were rumored never materialized. For instance, Stellantis did not pull Jeep production from its Brampton plant to Illinois in October 2025 over tariffs, nor did it break its 2023 subsidy deal with Canada. General Motors didn't announce a $4 billion loss for 2026 or cut 700 jobs in Oshawa due to a trade war. Likewise, Ford didn't take a massive $19.5 billion write-down on its EV plans because of collapsing supply chains. The auto sector certainly faces huge challenges, especially in the expensive and complicated transition to electric vehicles. But its struggles have been driven by global market forces, technological shifts, and post-pandemic supply chain kinks, not by a full-blown tariff war with Canada. The USMCA, for all its complexities, acted as a crucial shield, preserving the continental integration that allows the industry to function. The first domino wobbled, but it ultimately refused to fall. If the auto industry is the gearwork of the North American economy, the energy sector is its powerhouse. The United States enjoys incredible energy security thanks to its neighbor. In 2024, Canada supplied about 52% of all U.S. crude oil imports, flowing through a deeply integrated pipeline network directly to American refineries. This relationship helps insulate the U.S. from the volatility of OPEC and geopolitical turmoil. Imposing tariffs here felt like an act of strategic self-harm. The immediate effect was to create friction and uncertainty. The long-term risk was that it would send a message to Ottawa that the U.S. was no longer a reliable partner, forcing Canada to break its reliance on the American market. And while the trade tensions did spark renewed and more urgent discussions within Canada about diversifying its energy exports to Asia and Europe, this is a massive, long-term undertaking. Building the required pipelines and LNG terminals takes many years, if not decades. The fictional scenario of Ontario threatening to cut off electricity exports, prompting the U.S. to retaliate by jacking up steel tariffs to an unheard of 50%, simply did not happen. As of 2026, the reality is that the U.S. market remains the only viable destination for the vast majority of Canadian energy exports. While the relationship was stressed, America's energy leverage has not evaporated. Midwestern refineries, built to process heavy Canadian crude, have not faced a sudden crisis forcing them to retool. The episode served as a serious wake-up call for both nations about their interdependence, but it didn't fundamentally break the energy partnership that is a cornerstone of American security. For millions of Americans, the fear was that a trade war would show up directly in their bank accounts. The logic was simple. Tariffs on Canadian goods would make everything from lumber to groceries more expensive here, while Canadian retaliation would hurt U.S. exports and the jobs that rely on them. Some of this was true. Tariffs are taxes, and they do have economic consequences. The targeted duties on things like steel, aluminum, and lumber did contribute to price volatility and created real problems for specific industries, like home construction. However, the most extreme predictions of economic devastation never came to pass. Economists at institutions like the Brookings Institution noted the negative shocks from the tariffs, but the idea that they would shrink U.S. GDP by 1.6% or cost the average American household an extra $1,300 per year proved to be an exaggeration. The economy did not begin contracting, and the job market didn't hit its weakest point since 2010, as some reports feared. The escalatory spiral of ever-increasing tariffs, like a blanket 35% tax in July 2025, followed by another 10% in October, was a fictional scenario. The most sweeping proposed tariffs were moderated by USMCA exemptions, which prevented the kind of runaway inflation that would have truly hurt American families on a broad scale. The economic pain was real, but contained, a story of specific industries facing headwinds rather than a whole economy being dragged into a vicious cycle. By early 2026, the full picture came into focus. The story wasn't one of a weaker, poorer, and isolated America. It was the story of a critical alliance being pushed to its limits and holding, albeit with some bruises. The political drama that was imagined, like a stunning Senate rebuke where 4 Republicans would cross the aisle to nullify the tariffs in a 50-46 vote, did not happen. That level of political breaking point was never reached, precisely because the economic doomsday scenario was held in check. The administration's policy was a source of constant tension, but it didn't lead to a full-scale political revolt built on widespread economic collapse. The great irony is that the fears of a trade war ultimately highlighted the deep binding nature of the US-Canada relationship. The hyper-efficient cross-border supply chains were stressed but not destroyed, thanks in large part to the USMCA framework that was already in place. The auto industry was not dismantled, and America's energy security, while tested, was not surrendered. Meanwhile, Canada has continued to pursue a pragmatic path. The Trudeau government has navigated the tensions while simultaneously working to strengthen domestic industry and continuing the long-term goal of diversifying its trade relationships. This isn't a radical post-American pivot, but a prudent strategy to ensure Canada is never too reliant on a single partner. The U.S., in testing the limits of its economic power, received a powerful reminder that its own strength and prosperity are deeply connected to the stability of its closest ally. The threatened Canada War of 2025 serves as a crucial case study. It reminds us that in a deeply interconnected economy, even the threat of tearing up alliances can have serious consequences. But it also teaches a different lesson, that the structures of trade, built over decades, are more resilient than they often appear. The theory that the U.S. could use its market power as a simple cudgel ran into a complex reality. The USMCA, while not a perfect document, acted as the guardrails that prevented the car from flying off the cliff. It demonstrated that the partnership with Canada isn't a weakness to be exploited, but a core component of America's own industrial efficiency and energy security. The conflict inflicted real costs and created enormous uncertainty. But it did not lead to the hollowed-out industries and economic depression that many feared. The story of 2025 isn't one of a war that America lost, but of a crisis that was, for the most part, averted. What do you think is the biggest lesson from this period of trade tension? Are long-standing agreements like the USMCA enough to protect against future conflicts? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for more deep dives that separate the headlines from what really happened, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.